Today, we have a colorless artifact deck with Karn Silver Golem. This guy is really fun. I want to shout out my friend for allowing me to do the deck tech on his deck. I've played against this deck a couple times. It's very fun. So, without further ado, let's get right into this. What we're primarily doing here is we're going to utilize every aspect of artifacts, colorless spells, such as the bigger Eldrazi spells, but we're going to mainly focus on artifact interactions. So, here's the land base. We are starting with 20 wastes. A waste is a newer basic land that will only produce a colorless mana. There are some certain colorless spells that require this specific mana. But there's 20 wastes. And for those of you who remember the mono green Tron list in Modern, are the 3 Tron lands. These are extremely powerful. They're pretty good on their own, but when you have all 3 of these on the battlefield, you will be able to produce 7 colorless mana, which is huge. From 3 lands, that's pretty good. The mono green Tron deck in Modern is what I primarily played, but for those of you who really like the Modern format, let me know what you guys are playing currently. I'd like to hear about it. But here's the Tron lands with Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, and Urza's Power Plant. The tower will tap for 3 colorless if you have the other 2. Now we have a indestructible artifact land. This is a artifact itself, but it's indestructible, so it won't be destroyed. With Darksteel Citadel. Now we have a couple ways to go get these wastes with Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. Now, to deal with our opponent's lands, we're playing Tectonic Edge. This is basically a newer wasteland, but you could argue that he might want to consider running Wasteland, but it's probably for budget reasons. A Magic deck should not be driven by how much money one spends on the deck. Play the cards that make you happy. Now we have Ghost Quarter. I love Ghost Quarter because you can deal with pesky lands, but also if you target one of your own lands, you can go get a waste if you need it. Now we have my personal favorite colorless land with Inventor's Fair. At the beginning of every single upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you're going to gain a life. And gaining life in Magic is a necessity. But we're going to use Inventor's Fair to search for any artifact we want in the entire deck. Now we have Mystifying Maze. This is kind of like Maze of Ith, but You have to be careful with what creature you're going to exile with this, because if that creature had some kind of enter the battlefield trigger, you're just going to re-trigger that. So just be aware of that. Now we have Labyrinth of Scophos. I think the reason my friend is running this particular one over Mazabith is the fact Labyrinth can tap for mana, and the original Mazabith does not tap for mana. It just removes a creature from combat. Now we have Mage Ring Network. This is basically just a colorless storage land. You can let this thing sit around, just keep putting storage counters on it, and when you need a lot of mana, it'll be there for you. Now we have Dread Statuary. This is a land that will become a 4/2 Golem artifact creature. So it's a colorless man land. Now we have a very synergistic land with Phyrexia's Core. If I'm basically doing a lot of artifact themes or utilizing artifacts in general, I try to run Phyrexia's Core for the simple fact of gaining life is very important, and if you have a certain artifact that has a trigger when it goes to the graveyard, you can do that with Phyrexia's Core. Alright, that was the land base, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you guys have any suggestions for some other colorless lands that we could benefit from, let me know. I really want to hear from you guys. So, okay, let's get into the artifacts. First up is a 0 cost with Everflowing Chalice. Similar to that storage land, this is a storage mana artifact. Basically, all you have to do is have a lot of mana, and you can put as many counters on Everflowing Chalice as you want, and it'll tap for that many colorless mana for each charge counter in it. Plus, with counters, you can always proliferate them. And of course, we're playing Sol Ring. Now we have the iconic Voltaic Key. This is a very powerful artifact for what it does. You pay 1 and you untap another artifact. That doesn't sound like much, but if you're untapping a artifact that has a very powerful activated ability, such as adding a lot of mana, or like a trading post, or just getting many different abilities by untapping it and reusing the artifact again, is very powerful. Now we have a personal favorite of mine with Elixir of Immortality. I love this card. When this card was first introduced, I played it in almost every single deck I possibly could. And now that I'm pretty much focused on Commander, I tend to run Elixir in the decks that I want to keep reusing certain spells. Plus, getting 5 life is always good. Now we have Expedition Map, so we can go get the last remaining Tron piece if we need it, or whatever land you want. Now we have Manifold Key. Very similar to Voltaic Key, except what makes Manifold Key a little bit better, I think, is you can make any creature not be able to be blocked, such as, I don't know, a very large creature that we'll get to in just a moment. Now we have Relic of Progenitus. I love Relic in decks that don't really care about their graveyard. You can just have this sitting out and just constantly pick off your opponent's graveyard. Now we have Thought Vessel. We're not primarily too focused on drawing lots of cards in this deck, but just having the option of not having a maximum hand size is very beneficial. Now we have Thaumatic Compass. This is a fun one. Thaumatic Compass will allow us to go get more wastes out of our deck onto the battlefield. And if we control 7 or more lands, it transforms. And it transforms into this land, Spires of Orazca. Basically, this is our Maze of Ith. Now we have 2 very synergistic artifacts with Liquid Metal Coating and Liquid Metal Torque. Both of these cards are going to allow us to turn something that isn't a artifact into a artifact. Why would we want to do that? Well, if we take a look back at Karn, with his second ability of target non-creature artifact is a artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its casting cost. What that means is if we turn a opponent's land into an artifact and we activate Karn, that new artifact land is going to become a creature. And because lands have no mana cost, that land is sacrificed. So we're going to control our opponent's land base just with these alone. And it may not be a fun thing to do to your opponents or friends, but that's a very powerful effect. So let's keep that in mind. But also, what makes Liquid Metal Torque a little bit different is the fact Liquid Metal Torque will tap for mana, whereas Liquid Metal Coating does not. Okay, let's keep on trucking here. Now we have Helm of Awakening. This is just a cost reduction, but this will affect all players. But what we're going to be doing is so much bigger and better than what our opponents are doing. We don't really care too much. Okay, now we have Mycosynth Wellspring. When this enters or is put into a graveyard, you can search for a waste and put it onto the battlefield. So if you remember me talking about certain artifacts with Phyrexia's Core to gain you life, you have to sacrifice a artifact. If you sacrifice this or the next one, Ichor Wellspring, when these enter and leave the graveyard, you're getting so much more value just off it coming into play. You're gaining the life from the land, but also you get to go get a land or draw a card. So there's that. Okay, now we have a very classic mana rock with Mind Stone. I like Mind Stone. It's just a cheap, efficient artifact That's going to add you mana, and if you need to, you can draw a card. Within that is Mazemind Tome, where you can scry, and then you can pay to put a counter on it and draw a card. I view Mazemind Tome as kind of a better Mind Stone, but playing both is fine. Plus, Mazemind Tome will allow you to gain 4 life once there's 4 counters on it. Okay, now we have some disruption with Torpor Orb. Torpor Orb has many different uses. If we have a creature that has a negative enter the battlefield trigger, Torpor Orb is going to shut that off, but also for the creatures your opponents control, when those creatures enter, they're not going to trigger at all. So we can kind of utilize that in different ways. Okay, now we have a very popular mana rock with Basalt Monolith. This is just a 3-cost mana rock that will add 3 colorless mana, and you pay 3 to untap it. But it doesn't untap normally by itself. I don't think my friend is running the infinite combo where you can use the artifact, the Rings of Brighthearth, to copy the untap. That way you can produce infinite colorless mana. But may not be a bad idea. Now we have Sculpting Steel. If you guys remember my Shroom deck tech, Sculpting Steel is a catch-all. This is going to enter as a copy of whatever artifact you want. Now we have Oblivion Stone. I love Oblivion Stone. You can keep the non-land permanents you want around by putting the fake counter on it and destroying everything else. Now we have a very interesting artifact with Strixhaven Stadium. I've never played this card, but I think the only reason this card is here is because it has the potential of forcing one opponent to lose the game. Now we have Mirage Mirror. Mirage Mirror is pretty good. Basically, you can pay 2. Mirage Mirror will become a copy of any artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until the end of turn. So if we have a very powerful artifact, we're going to make a copy of it. Now we have Loxodon Warhammer. I love Loxodon Warhammer. It just beefs up a creature so well. Because it +3, +0, trample, and lifelink. So you're going to be pushing a lot of damage through. You're going to be gaining life. And chances are your opponents are going to have a very hard time blocking that creature with that equipped to it. Okay. Now we have Staff of Domination. You can do crazy things with Staff of Domination. Especially if you can produce infinite mana, you basically just win the game. Because you can just either gain infinite life or draw your entire deck. Now we have Thran Dynamo. This is just a bigger Basalt Monolith. But it does cost 4 mana. But you get three colorless mana. So if we have any kind of cost reduction, Thran Dynamo looks a lot better. Now we have Clock of Omens. I love this card. In any kind of artifact strategy, all you have to do is tap 2 untapped artifacts, and you can untap anything. Now we have Hedron Archive. I think Hedron Archive is kind of underplayed. It costs 4. You get 2 colorless mana, and you can draw 2 cards. The card's very good. Now we have Nevinyrral's Disc as just a big removal spell. Enters tapped, we can untap it. So basically for 5 mana, this is a colorless Wrath, where if all of our permanents are indestructible, we're not going to care too much. Now we have Mind's Eye. Mind's Eye is going to draw us a lot of cards because our opponents want to draw lots of cards. So whenever they draw, all we have to do is pay 1 and we get to draw. Now we have Mirrorworks. Mirrorworks is very powerful. Whenever another non-token artifact enters the battlefield, just pay 2 and get a token copy of that artifact. Now we have Forsaken Monument. Forsaken Monument does so much in this deck, it's not even funny. It buffs all our artifact creatures by 2. Whenever we tap a permanent for colorless mana, it's gonna produce a additional colorless mana. So basically, all our wastes are gonna become soul rings. And whenever we cast a colorless spell, we're gonna gain 2, which is kind of where we want to be. Now we have a very iconic win condition with Mindslaver. Mindslaver is not a very fun card. However, we're going to utilize Mindslaver to win the game. Now we have Mycosynth Lattice and Darksteel Forge. These are 2 very iconic artifacts. Mycosynth Lattice is going to turn every single permanent into a artifact. And everything is devoid of color. In Darksteel Forge, all our artifacts are indestructible from here on out. But this pairs very nicely with a very certain Planeswalker, which I'll get to in just a moment. And finally, we have Spine of Isha. This is going to single-handedly just destroy permanents. But we can use Phyrexia's Core to sacrifice this to gain a life, and Spine of Isha will return back to our hand. Okay, those were all the artifacts. Let me know what y'all thought about that. Let's get into the 3 Planeswalkers that are going to synergize so well. First up is the iconic Karn the Great Creator. If we have Mycosynth Lattice, our opponents are not going to play the game. Because once all your opponent's permanents are artifacts, Karn the Great Creator's static ability states activated abilities of your opponent's artifacts can't be activated. What that means is your opponents are just going to sit there and really not do anything. Sounds like fun, right? I don't know. I did this thing in Modern, and I still enjoy it. So, next we have Ugin the Ineffable. This is going to be very beneficial for us. He's a very large colorless cost reduction with 2. So if we have this guy and Helm of Awakening, every spell we're going to cast is going to cost 3 less. That's huge. But in a strange way, when you plus Ugin, You're going to exile the top card face down. It'll become a 2/2 Colorless Spirit. But if that creature dies, that goes into your hand. And we can just -3 and destroy a permanent that's 1 or more colors. Basically non-land, because lands do not have color. And finally, we have the big guy himself, Ugin the Spirit Dragon. I played this guy in the modern mono green Tron list, and it's pretty much game over when he hits the battlefield. He's very difficult to kill, and he's just going to exile all permanents with converted mana cost X or less. That's 1 or more colors. So if it's colorless, you have nothing to worry about. We could just -0 and exile all the colored tokens if we want, if we don't want to remove loyalty counters. And if you get the ultimate Ugin the Spirit Dragon, you're pretty much so far ahead anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, let's get into the artifact creatures. First up is the very iconic Metalworker. This card does have a price tag to it, but for what it does, it's absolutely insane. You're going to add so much colorless mana just by revealing artifact cards in your hand. You get 2 colorless mana for each card you reveal, and that's huge. Next, we have Scrap Trawler. Whenever any artifact goes to the graveyard, we're going to get it back with Scrap Trawler. And I'm sure there's some kind of infinite combo with Scrap Trawler, but it's not always just about infinite combos. Next we have Scarecrow. Scarecrow is going to be very beneficial for us. We can sacrifice himself. If Scrap Trawler is out and this goes to the graveyard, you can return a artifact that's 2 or less. But we're going to use this guy by paying 4 and returning any artifact creature that's in our graveyard back onto the battlefield. Now we have Burnished Heart. Burnished Heart is just primarily here just to get us more lands. Now we have Filigree Familiar. When this enters, you're going to gain 2 life. When it dies, you're going to draw a card. So basically, this is kind of like a Mycosynth Wellspring on a creature. Now we have Palladiumer. Palladiumer is pretty iconic in the artifact world. It's a 3 mana 2/2 that's going to add you 2 mana. He's a Soul Ring. He's a living Soul Ring. Now we have Foundry Inspector. This guy is just going to reduce the cost of our artifact spells. Now we have Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. This is a very, very good card. This guy basically replaced Shimmermer by allowing your artifact spells to have flash, or can be cast anytime you can cast an instant. But whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast it is greater than its power, you get to put a counter on Liberator. That way he gets bigger. And he could be like a snap flash blocker if you really need him to. Okay, now we have the iconic Sad Robot. I love Sad Robot, or Solemn Simulacrum. When he enters, you get to search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. When it dies, you get to draw a card. Now we have Lodestone Golem. He's a one-sided cost reduction. Basically, if it's not a artifact, it's going to tax your opponents by forcing them to cost 1 colorless more. Now we have Traxos, Scourge of Krug. This is just a very large creature with a very low cost, but it enters tapped and doesn't untap unless you cast a historic spell. Basically, an artifact, a legendary, or a saga. Well, luckily we're playing 2 out of the 3. I haven't seen a saga yet. So, okay. Now we have Karn Legacy Reforged. I haven't had the chance to play with this guy. He just seems really powerful. But his power and toughness are going to be equal to the greatest mana cost. But at the beginning of your upkeep, you get 1 colorless mana for each artifact you control. So if we have a crap ton of artifacts, we're going to get a crap ton of mana. And we don't lose that mana as the phases end. Now we have Koldatha Forge Master. I love this guy. All you do, sacrifice 3 artifacts, go get any artifact you want, put it on the battlefield. And he has a huge butt. Look at that. It's a 3/5. Good luck trying to lightning bolt that. Now we have Duplicate. Duplicate is very powerful. For the simple fact of, when this enters, you're going to exile the creature that's going to imprint it. So, Duplicate is going to get rid of your commander, and it's going to become a copy of it. Or whatever big threat is on the board. Now we have Wormcoil Engine. I love this card. A 6 cost, 6/6 artifact creature with Death Touch and Lifelink, and when it dies, it multiplies. Now we have Steel Hellkite. I love Steel Hellkite as well. This guy is hard to block. If it deals combat damage to you, you get to destroy destroy each non-land permanent that player controls just by dumping a bunch of mana in it. Plus he has fire breathing. Colorless fire breathing. Now we have the infamous Battle Ball or Myr Battlesphere. This guy has a huge ass too. A 4/7. That's a lot. But when he enters the battlefield, you're getting 4 more artifact permanents with the Myr tokens that we're going to use to make this guy bigger, and your opponents are going to take a lot more damage. Now we have Meteor Golem. Meteor Golem is phenomenal. He's just a big dude. He comes in, he destroys any non-land permanent you want. So if we can keep getting this guy back, we're just going to keep destroying stuff. Now we have Endbringer. Endbringer is fun. He doesn't untap normally, but he's kind of like a goblin sharpshooter. But we're going to use him to lock down a creature by forcing it not to attack or block. We're going to draw cards with it. And we're going to deal 1 damage to whatever we want. So if we can find a way to keep untapping this guy, like, I don't know, turn this guy into a artifact and keep tapping and untapping it, seems good. Now we have a newer one with Devourer of Destiny. This guy's big. Basically, when you cast this, you're going to exile a permanent. That's 1 or more colors. But he has the ability, you can reveal this from your opening hand, and you get to look at the top 4 and put one of them back on top of your library. So you basically get to set up your top 4 when he's in your opening hand. Now we have Mycosynth Golem. This guy's amazing. Even though it seems, even though he seems very expensive for 11 mana, this is going to cost 1 less for each artifact you control. But more importantly, your artifact spells are going to have affinity as well. So we're going to reduce the cost of many things that we play, such as this guy, Blightsteel Colossus. There's really not much more I need to say about Blightsteel Colossus. If you get this guy on the battlefield and you get the hit with it, your opponent is dead. End of story. He's going to deal 11 infect damage, and you only need 10. It doesn't matter if your opponent is at 900 life. He gets 10 poison counters. He loses the game. And that was all the creatures. Okay, now we have a couple instants. First up is Null Elemental Blast and Warping Wail. This is basically a counterspell that's colorless, but you can destroy a multicolored permanent, or if the spell is multicolored, you can counter it. Warping Wail is pretty good. It'll counter a sorcery spell, but if your opponent's creature has a very low toughness or power, such as 1, you can exile that creature. And this will give us a little Scion buddy that we can use later. Okay. Now we have 2 very powerful sorceries, with All Is Dust and Rise of Eldrazi. All Is Dust is going to get rid of all your opponent's colored permanents. And Rise of Eldrazi is just very crazy. You're going to destroy a permanent, you're going to draw 4 cards, and you're going to take another turn after this. But if you remember me going back to Karn the Great Creator, there's a very unique synergy I found. If you also have Mycosynth Lattice, and that was the deck for Karn Silver Golem. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think the moral of this deck is you don't need color to win games. So be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share these videos, and I will see you guys in the next video.